There is a version of Chennedy Carter that most people never saw. Not the highlight, not the headline, not the flagrant foul that broke the internet. The version that existed in the quiet in a gym somewhere overseas, in a country where nobody knew her name, putting up numbers that nobody was counting. That version is where this story actually lives. Before Las Vegas, before the comeback, before any of it made sense. She was 22 years old when her professional career began to unravel. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way things fall apart when the pressure is real and the support is thin, and the system around you was never quite built for someone like you. Chennedy Carter came into this league as one of the most electric scorers of her generation, and within 2 years, every door had closed. What she did next, in the silence after that, is the story worth telling. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, consider subscribing. There is more where this came from. Chennedy Carter grew up in Pflugerville, Texas, a suburb outside Austin where basketball wasn't just a hobby. It was the clearest path forward she could see. She was the kind of player who didn't need to be told twice. The competitiveness was already there, already hardwired, already showing up in ways that made coaches notice and sometimes made them nervous. She played with an edge that felt less like attitude and more like hunger, the kind that forms when you understand early that talent alone isn't enough, that you have to take what's yours. At Texas A&M, she became one of the most decorated guards in program history, SEC Player of the Year, a scorer who could create from anywhere on the floor. She was selected 4th overall in the 2019 WNBA draft by the Atlanta Dream, a franchise that needed a spark, a identity, something to believe in. And in her rookie season, she gave them exactly that. 17 points per game, nearly 48% shooting, a 3-5-point performance that announced, without any ambiguity, that she belonged. The foundation looked solid. What was built on top of it would prove far more complicated. The Atlanta Dream in 2021 was not a stable environment. They had one of the worst defensive ratings in the league, a fractured roster culture, and the kind of internal pressure that doesn't show up in box scores but lives in every film session, every timeout, every moment a young player looks to the bench for something steady and finds nothing. Chennedy Carter was asked to carry offensive production for a team that couldn't protect her on the other end. That is a specific kind of exhaustion, the kind that wears on a player long before any incident makes the news. She averaged 14.2 points through her first 11 games of the 2021 season, still producing, still the most dangerous thing on that roster. Then came an elbow injury, a stretch on the sideline, and the slow erosion of whatever footing she had built. The organization would later say they were hopeful the situation could be fixed. But the structure that surrounded her, the coaching instability, the losing culture, the absence of a system built around her strengths was never seriously examined. It was easier to label the player than to question the environment. That pattern, once it starts, rarely stops at one franchise. What makes Chennedy Carter genuinely different as a scorer isn't just the athleticism, it's the decisiveness. She processes the floor at a speed that most guards take years to develop, if they develop it at all. She doesn't hesitate at the rim. She doesn't second guess in transition. When she has a step on her defender, the basket is already made in her mind before her body arrives. That quality, that absolute conviction in her own reads is what produced 3-5-point rookie performances and what later produced 5-1-point nights in China when nobody was watching. Her game is built around getting downhill. She attacks closeouts, she turns defensive rotations into open lanes, and she finishes through contact with a consistency that requires both skill and fearlessness. It is precisely why Becky Hammond wanted her in Las Vegas. The Aces had spent 3 seasons as one of the least effective teams in the league at getting to the restricted area. Carter doesn't just solve that problem, she erases it entirely. The tactical fit was never a question for anyone who had actually watched her play overseas. The only question was whether anyone in the WNBA was still paying close enough attention to see it. The 4th of July, 2021. A game against the Las Vegas Aces, ironically, the same franchise that would later rebuild her career. A heated exchange on the bench, an argument about playing time that spilled past the final buzzer. No physical altercation occurred. Courtney Williams herself went on record to say so. But the Atlanta Dream suspended Carter indefinitely anyway, traded her to the Los Angeles Sparks the following February, and closed the chapter without ever seriously asking what broke down and why. She never played another minute for Atlanta. Los Angeles was supposed to be a reset. It became something closer to an erasure. She played 24 games, averaged 8.9 points in under 17 minutes a night, less than half the floor time she'd had in Atlanta. A player who had scored 35 points in a rookie season game was being handed 16 minutes and called a risk. At the end of that season, the Sparks waived her. She entered free agency. Not one team signed her. The entire league looked at a top-5 draft pick with proven scoring ability and collectively decided the file was closed. She was 24 years old. What do you think shapes a player more in moments like that? The outside world closing its doors, or the private decision to keep knocking anyway? Leave your thoughts below. Turkey, China, Mexico. 3 countries, 3 languages, 3 entirely different versions of professional basketball. Most players who get pushed out of the WNBA find one overseas landing spot and make the best of it. Chennedy Carter found 3. And in each one, she didn't just survive, she led. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone is putting in work that no camera is recording, in practice sessions that no scout is attending, in the repetitive and unglamorous process of rebuilding confidence from the inside out. She admitted herself that her first trip to Turkey at 21 ended early. She was homesick. She came home, and then she went back. That second trip, the return, the choice to go somewhere hard again, knowing exactly how hard it was, that is the detail that tells you everything about who she became in those quiet years. In Turkey with Bursa, she averaged 23.6 points and 5.7 assists per game. In China, she dropped 51 points in a single game and became the league's leading scorer with 31.4 points per game. In Mexico, she carried a team to a championship final. The hours behind those numbers belonged entirely to her. No spotlight, no validation, no guarantee that anyone back home would ever notice. There is a phone call that changed everything, and it didn't come from an agent or a front office. It came from Teresa Weatherspoon. Carter's head coach with the Chicago Sky in 2024 had watched her every single day that season. She saw the 17.5 points per game and the 48.7% shooting. But more than the numbers, she saw something harder to measure. She saw a player who had done the internal work, who had grown, who was ready for something bigger than what Chicago could offer her. And when the Las Vegas Aces came asking, Weatherspoon picked up the phone and vouched for her personally. That kind of recommendation costs something. It puts a coach's own credibility on the line. Weatherspoon didn't have to make that call, she chose to. And on the other end of it was Becky Hammond, one of the most respected coaches in the sport, who listened and believed her. Carter later described the moment she found out with a simplicity that said more than any long speech could. She said she felt like eventually, before her career was over, she'd be an ace. She had already seen it. The relationship between those 2 women, a coach who believed in her before the world caught up, and a player who finally had someone put their name behind hers, is quietly the hinge point of this entire story. The 13th of May, 2026. Las Vegas Aces versus the Connecticut Sunday. Carter comes off the bench, not a starter, not the focal point, not the name anyone outside of hardcore fans is tracking that night. She scores 22 points in the first meeting. Then in the rematch, she goes 13 of 16 from the field for 27 points. 13 makes on 16 attempts. That shooting percentage doesn't belong in a box score, it belongs in a geometry textbook. The Aces win 98-69. And Carter is the engine that makes the margin that large. What makes those numbers meaningful isn't just the efficiency, it's the context. Aja Wilson commands every defensive scheme on the floor. She draws attention the way few players in the history of this league ever have. And in the space that creates, Carter is doing exactly what Hammond brought her in to do, attacking the rim, finishing through contact, turning defensive breakdowns into automatic points before the rotation can recover. She isn't forcing anything. She isn't carrying anything. She is reading the game at full speed and making decisions that only someone with years of high-pressure overseas basketball could make that cleanly. Those years, in silence, Turkey, China, Mexico, they didn't just keep her career alive. They built the player that showed up in Las Vegas, ready to do this. The statistics from Chennedy Carter's overseas years are remarkable on their own terms. But the number that matters most doesn't appear in any box score. It's the number of times she chose to stay when leaving. Would have been easier the second trip to Turkey when the first one broke her, the 5-1 point game in China that nobody clipped, the championship run in Mexico that nobody streamed. Resilience is an overused word in sports. What Carter demonstrated across those 3 years was something quieter and more specific. It was the refusal to let other people's conclusions become her own. She came back to the WNBA not as someone who had been forgiven, but as someone who had made forgiveness irrelevant. The work she did in private rendered the old narrative obsolete. That is a different kind of achievement than any scoring title. It requires a level of self-knowledge that most people, athlete or otherwise, never fully develop. Teresa Weatherspoon saw it. Becky Hammond believed it. And now every team in the league is watching a player coming off the bench for the Las Vegas Aces and quietly reconsidering what they passed on. The numbers told part of the story. The part they never captured was the decision, made alone, in a gym far from home, to keep being exactly who she was. The Las Vegas Aces are a championship organization. Every player on that roster is being measured against the highest standard the sport currently offers. For Chennedy Carter, that pressure is not a burden. It is the exact environment she spent 4 years preparing for without knowing it. The overseas leagues, the unsigned summers, the quiet performances in arenas nobody was watching. All of it was building toward a moment that required someone who had already been tested by silence and chosen to keep going anyway. What happens next for her is genuinely unwritten. She is 26 years old, playing the best basketball of her professional career, in a system designed to let her be exactly what she is. The league that passed on her is now watching every game. The coaches who labeled her are now studying her film. And somewhere in a gym in Las Vegas, Chennedy Carter is preparing for the next game the same way she prepared for every game in Turkey and China and Mexico, with the quiet certainty of someone who never needed the world to believe it first. Stories like hers don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive with a box score, and then another. And then slowly the picture becomes impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, a like means more than you might think. And if you want to see what comes next, we will be here.